Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming to the first of the ICLR encounters. We're very, very lucky to have here this evening Jon Snow, a very well-known, well-respected journalist and broadcaster, who I think probably doesn't need very much introduction from me. And to speak with him this evening, Elanor Dymott, a law reporter, a solicitor, and now a novelist, whose first novel, Every Contact Leaves a Trace, has recently been published. And they are here to discuss the truth, the whole truth, or a version of the truth. Thank you very much.
Jon, I'm going to kick off by asking you a question, which, having read your amazing book, I've been thinking about quite a lot. I have this picture of what you do as being obviously a very kind of muscular thing, almost or literally often running around the world after a story. And one of the things that's always really interested me is the fact that when you go in search of a story, there is a real need to keep an incredible open-mindedness about the truth, to go into it without, obviously, too much in the way of preconception about what you're going to find, but obviously at the same time, you have to know what you're looking for. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think the truth is you actually travel with a lifetime of prejudice, without a doubt. And you've got to try and offset that. You've got to understand your prejudices and your biases and your loves and dislikes. And you've got to sort of pare it away and put it away and as you say, throw yourself to some extent into the melee. I mean, undoubtedly, going out onto the ground to be in the heart of what is going on is by far the most stimulating way of attempting to get at the truth. But of course, you can be so deep into this thing that it's almost impossible to stand back and say, hang on a minute, this is what's happened. Now, this time last year, I was in, well, a little earlier than that, I was in Tahrir Square in Cairo. And to be absolutely honest, not speaking Arabic, it was extremely difficult to work out what was going on. Because at one moment, people would come charging through the crowd, firing guns, riding camels, and looking as mad as pikestaffs. And then, a moment later, you'd be talking in English to some extremely sophisticated Cairo residents who would be telling you that revolution has come. And you had no idea, really, whether what you were seeing was an exaggeration. Now, in fact, the truth of Tahrir Square, as I discovered once I left it, to wander around the streets around, was that it was an incredibly localized event. That actually, if you went to other parts of Cairo, there was nothing happening at all. Now, that may be because everybody was in Tahrir Square. But actually, of course, if you hung around, you found people popping out of their doors and all the rest. There were a lot of people who weren't in Tahrir Square. But life is not about reporting people who are not in Tahrir Square. That wouldn't get very far on tonight's bulletin. And so Tahrir Square, which could only contain about 100,000 people, it was certainly not capable of containing 1 million people, and there are 80 million people in Egypt. So how far, what we were looking at, how far did it really represent truth? How far was this the will of the Egyptian people to chuck out Mubarak? Well, that's a very, if you don't really know Egypt very well, I've been there a few times, but not so as you know. And so you have this judgment you've got to make, and of course there is also enormous pressure from other media organizations who are already reporting that the revolution is underway. And the last thing you want to do with the revolution, unfortunately, is to be on the wrong side and to be saying, I don't think this is happening, I mean, these people are here, but, the truth of the matter is they've all come out for a good time. So truth is a very difficult thing when it comes. And, of course, the other thing is you've got time pressures. Now, I know lawyers have time pressures because the court can't go on sitting forever. And you can't go on standing about forever because they want to know tonight. Tonight. The court at least doesn't want to know tonight, not normally anyway, but tonight. So that pressure also impinges on the truth. But we do the best we can, and I mean, I'm much more interested really in court reporting, which you see I've never really thought about. I assumed court reporters were people who kept a verbatim transcript of what was going on.
Some people often get confused with the idea of a stenographer,
They're
which
true.
is the very
True,
which
because
obviously
that's the most obvious reporting that's going on.
yeah, which is a kind of actual literal transcription of what's being
Yeah.
said. And what the law reporter will do is a kind of a version of that where you are trying to get a very literal transcription of what's happening, but at the same time you are, as you're transcribing it, analysing it and trying to record a very succinct version of the argument. So that
But even for you, prejudice must creep in. This man is a complete shit.
well, I mean, one of the wonderful things about lawyers is their incredible powers of objectivity and their ability to always stand back from the situation and carry out that kind of dual process of analysis with recording. But I think one of the pressures on a law reporter at that point is knowing that they're going to be the one that at some point in the future will be writing up the argument. And an amazing...
And unlike us, you're trained. I mean, the truth of the matter is, any journalist who claims he's been trained is talking nonsense. Joshua was never trained. I mean, come on. I mean, he may have been some sort of intern at the BBC, but, or the Telegraph, or whatever. But the truth of the matter is that we come to this very raw. I mean, one of the reasons I became a journalist was because I wanted to get back to Uganda, where I'd done VSO. And I looked at the options for getting back to Uganda. Medicine, I didn't have any science. Being a priest and a missionary, I didn't have any God, or not enough. Then I thought, journalism, you don't need anything. All you need to be is very inquisitive. Now you at least are armed with years of struggle to comprehend and be on top of the law.
Any reporter for the ICLR has been qualified as a lawyer. So the arguments that are being listened to in court by a law reporter from the Incorporated Council of Law Reporting are being listened to by a lawyer.
And then quite suddenly you are flying fancy-free.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't have to bother with the truth.
No, not at all.
And yet if there isn't a truth somewhere, a thread that ends up in a truth that is the author's truth, i.e. what the author feels happened in this fantasy, the book wouldn't work.
Well, I think a lot of books, most books I'm sure, are written with an understanding that they won't work for some people and they will work for other people. But I did...
work because they're true? Or, I mean, because they have a sense of truth?
I guess they have to have an internal kind of truth of their own. But I did draw enormous encouragement from a comment I read 8 or 9 years ago in an interview with Alan Bennett, in which he said the wonderful thing about writing fiction is that there are no wrong answers.
Are there truths that emerge from a work of fiction?
I think there are truths which emerge from a work of fiction which are to do with what it is to live, what it is to be a human being, what it is to interact with other people and to relate to something which I would refer to as emotion, what it is to feel, what it is to be alive. And writing fiction is a way of for me, very definitely trying to capture that experience, both my own and other people's. And I suppose that is a truth that I'm trying to pin down in some way.
Is writing a book like that an emotional journey?
It was a very emotional experience. I guess a journey would suggest that it has a beginning and an end, and that's not something I've been aware of having. But it's definitely, I mean, something that one has to engage with on an emotional level.
Thank you very, very much, both of you. Who would like to ask a question first? Okay.
You know, there's the idea of the truth lying somewhere in the realm of empathy. And that question might be posed to both of you in terms of, you know, where your respective disciplines come to terms with empathy and the truth.
One of the really interesting things I've often seen as a law reporter is people coming to court who themselves are involved in the case, and it very often seems that there's an idea that they believe that their presence will somehow influence the outcome of a case. This is obviously taking that question of empathy in a kind of a broad sense, but a number of cases are coming to mind where a case will be a fairly short case, say it's not on the scale of a Stephen Lawrence, but nevertheless, any decision which comes to court is obviously going to be a big one for the person involved, and many cases one sees can be over in a day, which will have an outcome which will determine the course of the rest of the life of the person who's there. It may be a small accident at work, or it may be a car crash, it may be any number of things which, you know, something has happened which means that that person's life will be changed forever, and at the end of each side giving their arguments, the judgment will often be given extempore, so the decision is made on the spur of the moment. And Amy, you asked if I cried in court. One of the things I did find incredibly difficult was this feeling of a story progressing during the course of a day that you know by the end of the day it will be over and that person's life will have been changed. And it's very difficult, I think, sometimes to see that person in court and to, at that point, realise that for them it's, I would say, impossible for, and you'd say we don't really talk about our justice system enough. We don't talk about the fact that the law has to be objective and that there has to be no empathy from the bench. The bench has to give a decision that will stand up in law and be used as a precedent for cases to come years and years and years down the line. But for that person at that moment, there are very few people who are going to be able to not expect or hope for empathy in their particular case. There's no place for empathy in the law. There's no place for empathy in a courtroom.
There's a very persistent hand over here.
Thank you. I was just wondering what you thought was better at getting at the truth, lawyers in the courts or journalists?
Well, I think we're seeing an absolutely delicious fusion in Leveson. Leveson would not be sitting were it not for one or two quite remarkable investigative journalists who brought certain truths to the public realm and truths that demanded the law play a part in bringing out. I think Leveson is running, it's not a court of law and it's not, quite the judicial inquiry we're used to, but it's an extraordinarily cathartic encounter with the truth, or with a series of claimed truths. We don't know how much of what he gets told is the truth, but definitely truths have come out. The specific truths, individual cases, maybe yet have to be proved, but that there was a generic corruption of many facets of our public life is a truth, and that has been manifested by that process. So I think in Leveson you see, as I say, what I would call a delicious fusion, and it's all to the better of society that it's happening.
Can I take a completely different tack for a moment and ask both of you to explain the difference to me, because I haven't a clue, between a truth and a fact?
Truth and a fact.
Well, we deal in very, very few facts. But I mean, I know one of the facts I read out tonight was that the FT index had gone up by, 32 points. But that is a fact. Well, is it? I mean, are they telling the truth? That's what they say.
I have a slight feeling that a truth is something which carries emotional weight.
Yeah.
I.e., you alluded to a generic corruption. We do not know for a fact how many bottles of champagne were drunk by members of the Metropolitan Police and News International.
Yeah.
But we are willing to accept the truth that something of that nature occurred.
I think of times I've walked into court and heard the first argument and thought, oh my God, that's awful. And then the second argument thought, oh no, that's really awful. And actually realised that every single time, still after even 8 or 9 years, I was still falling for the first story every single time, because it's a difficult thing to remember that somebody's quite possibly making it up. And if you have a particularly good advocate, they can make it up really well. And
Would that be a convenient moment to stop, I think?
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, John, and thank all people in the audience for coming and taking part in this lively and interesting discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Paul.